Waddesdon is a place that just gets to you straight away. It's so full of things. And the essence of Ferdinand Rothschild's obsession and his dream, and then all the details that were within that dream that evolved, it was almost as if he had this faith that he would start with a hill and build this house and then fill it with layer and layer of things. And really, in essence, when I was making the pieces, especially Alice and Ferdinand, I kind of started with a pot and just added to it and let it happen. And it's about faith in the making, or faith in the doing. When I started the Alice pot, I didn't know how she was going to look. Each time I added a layer of something, I didn't know what the next was going to be. And in a way, I know Ferdinand, when he built this house and he had this vision and he had this sort of obviously push and energy, this life force to do that, I kind of wonder if he felt the same way, because collecting, which is what he was fanatical about, is a layering thing. There were times where we were all full on, and I was like a conductor of an orchestra really, with all these skills around me, with Tom throwing and Helen knotting and people doing different parts of it, and I was pulling it together and conducting it to make this sort of symphony that became the show. And it was just so full of surprises. I had to keep trying to remind myself that this was about being brave and new things, or extra things, or more than I'd done before. And really, Waddesdon, when you go, there's this great shock of this full and over-decorated and overfilled, fantastic sort of layering of things. And that was a parallel with the experience of making the work for the show. The sketchbooks that I made while I was doing the project are very much similar to the process, in that I went back and forward through pages and layered onto pages in the same way as I think Ferdinand did, and in the same way as these pots grew. It's a huge thing I say to people about having faith in the process. I really rely on instinct. I was very aware that who was I making this show for? It's great that it's a National Trust property, and that the public who might have just gone for a walk in the park might stumble upon the show, which was free to go into. But at the same time, who was I making it for? I did the portrait of Ferdinand, the starter, the seed of the house, the life force behind it, and his sister Alice. But then, of course, there were the collections of his relatives, but also, as important as anything, were the people who dragged the trees up the hill and planted them, the gardeners, the cooks, the builders, the carvers of those portico shapes. It was really, and so it was about making fancy pots for the sort of, I don't know, the person who'd instigated, but also simple and pure, and pots full of love for the people who really made the place. I had no idea really that I'd be making pots that were knotted. I saw the passementerie, all the trimmings on the furnishings, and saw all this twisting, which related to my love of British country pottery and twisted handles. But once I started twisting, the sort of natural layering that is Waddesdon kind of took over, and I started knotting. You know, Helen and I, my assistant in the studio, we just suddenly had this revelation. You know, when the film was being made, we sort of knotted it right in front of us, and then we looked up knots on the internet. We started sort of looking at ship's knots and upholstery knots, and it was just this lovely sort of eureka moment, if you like, which then, once you have that, you then use it and follow it, and it's then when your heart cuts in. I mean, no, your heart and your gut is the start, but when your head takes over and you start looking and researching knots and realising that the clay has to be a perfect state. Ceramics is about timing. Ceramics is about doing the right thing at the right time with the right clay. And so learning how to use the clay so wet that we can bend it within seconds. You know, there's a window of seconds where the clay is good to knot and bad to knot. And then realising that I was going to do twists on a pot, and then we added a layer of knots, and then we added more knots, and it was just a sort of constant surprise, really. And that was the delight of the project. What is it that I want to show? What is it that I want to say? What is it that I want to learn? I want to learn new techniques, and I think ceramics is so fabulous because it presents such a huge spectrum of things to learn about, that there's always things undone and unlearned. So that was the personal thing. But at the same time, I wanted to make it for visitors, National Trust visitors. That's children as well as grown-ups. And that's people who know and love ceramics, and people who've never seen it before. So I wanted to make it quite immediate. I also wanted to make it instructive about the house, so people going to the show might learn about the house in a different way, or see it in a different light. And I think the Rothschild Foundation, I think their objectives possibly was to show a contemporary interpretation of a house that's been finished for a very long time. So really, the only thing I could do when I went into the house was cherry pick things that would start the ball rolling. And it was the twisted tassels on the curtains, it was the form and shape and profile of the serre, really, and it was some of this crisscross pattern that was on the radiators, the carpets, outside in the ivy on the tower, on textiles and things, this lovely crisscrossing. So and those all struck a chord for me, because pineapples, which I've made for years, have this crisscross. So again, it went bing in my subconscious. You know, the twisting and the tassels went bing in my subconscious because I love handles that are twisted. So those were my simple starting point, and those I pulled on and started to see how I could apply them, because I believe so deeply in the process taking over and not thinking about it too much. It's then, as a maker, that you have to stay aware of the things on the periphery. And I actually find personally, if I'm making a pot and I have a vision for it, and I'm really sort of tunnel vision to make it, it's actually all the scraps on the table, it's the ideas that are coming in at the sides and are really in the periphery vision that are possibly more interesting than that central focus that you have. And so as an artist, after all these years, I still try and look for those ideas that flash to you in your half sleep, or in the shower, or when you're doing something completely automatically that's nothing to do with one's professional practice. They sort of zoom in and it's just catching them like fish. It's all like fireflies around a light. And it's that which I hope to be constantly aware of. I hope I never am blind to those really important side bits. Waddesdon's on the top of this hill, and as you go up the hill you have this journey going to this sort of wonderland, and in a way when I'm working at my desk it is a wonderland for me, so there's great parallels. And I started quilling these big pots that I knew I wanted a pair of very stately pots in the show. Didn't know what I was going to do with them. I knew I'd seen maps with trees on, and I'd taken interpretation of the trees the way the map maker had interpreted the trees on the map, and I'd made some sprigs. But when faced with these giant pots, I didn't actually know that I'd be drawing the curling hill, the road that turns up the hill to the house at the top. And that's about faith in making. I just stood with the pot in front of me. I thought, how am I going to use these trees? And it was just logical as the pot turned on the turntable to then create the feeling that you got. Because as you do go up to Waddesdon, it is this other land. You can't even get internet reception up there, because it is this other place. I was able to look at things in the archive as well, pieces that are collected in books and things, and I found these great maps of the plans of the architects and the plumbers, and then I found this fantastic book of a masquerade of figures, and it was all these craftsmen with all their tools, and I so believe in the importance of fine craftsmanship and the tools, which I love. I love my tool trolley in my studio. In essence, it's about that, and I found this book and had transfers printed of those figures, and I was intending to put them on the jugs and teapots and flower pots, but in fact they spread right across onto the pumpkins and gourds. Again, having faith in the process, not planning, but doing and having momentum, and let that momentum add layer upon layer and spread, and not keep a narrow and tight vision of how I wanted to do things. So really it was experimenting, and then it's like being in a playroom, I suppose, and turning from your train set to your doll's house, to here, to there, and then pulling it together into this beautiful world. I felt so lucky to have been doing those things, and really the things that I learned in that month's research time is going to feed me for a decade, until I die. It's so fascinating. It's this great transformation with clay, is that you make with this soft stuff of the earth, and then when you fire it, it's solid, it's permanent, it's forever actually. The oldest pot that's made is 29,000 years old, and so really what we're making is something that's there forever. I hope I did well enough and made things good enough, because I did all I possibly could have done. What I always want to remember, really, coming back to the fact that this is clay, this is soft, this is malleable, this is raw clay, and it's about squeezing, it's about pushing and having faith in the process, but then it's about refining, and I think that's really what Waddesdon is about. You have this great energy of this hill and build this house, and then there is the refinement. And even after Ferdinand died and his sister Alice took over for decades and decades and brought collections together, and then when she passed away, some more Rothschild came with their detailing and their interest, so it's about that. And I'd like to think really that the show is about that. The pieces that I made might stimulate other people to move on with those, and so part of what I've made becomes this great momentum of the life force, which really, really interests me.